The police had his fingerprints on the murder weapon. They had his DNA under her fingernails. They had security footage of him breaking into her home. They had 3 witnesses who heard him threaten to kill her just days before. And yet, Dr. Brenda Mitchell's killer has been walking free for over 4 years, while her family begs for justice that will never come. How is this possible in America? How does a man literally caught red-handed escape consequences, while the woman he murdered, a therapist who dedicated her life to helping domestic violence survivors, rots in her grave? The answer will make you sick to your stomach and question everything you thought you knew about our justice system. But before we dive into the corruption that let a killer walk free, you need to understand exactly who we lost that night. Because Brenda Mitchell wasn't just another victim. She was the one person who could have saved herself if only she'd seen the monster hiding behind the man she once loved. What do you think when you hear about cases like this? Are you as outraged as I am that killers walk free while families suffer? Drop a comment below. I want to know if you think our justice system is broken beyond repair. You should hit the subscribe button immediately if you find stories like this upsetting and you think victims should receive justice regardless of the length of time it takes. We're not just telling stories here. We're fighting for the forgotten, the silenced, and the failed. Your subscription literally helps us investigate more cases and maybe, just maybe, help solve these crimes. Dr. Brenda Mitchell was 34 years old when she died, but she had already saved more lives than most people twice her age. Every morning she walked into her practice in downtown Portland and sat across from women who looked exactly like she used to. Broken, scared, convinced they deserved the hell they were living in, Brenda specialized in helping domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. She'd written 2 best-selling books about recognizing abuse patterns. She spoke at conferences across the country. She ran a non-profit that had helped over 2,000 women escape abusive relationships. The irony is so cruel, it feels like a sick joke. The woman who made it her life's mission to protect others from exactly what happened to her couldn't protect herself when it mattered most. But Brenda wasn't always Dr. Mitchell, the confident therapist, with the warm smile and the gentle voice that made broken people feel safe. 7 years before her death, she was Brenda Peterson, a 27-year-old graduate student dating a charming psychology major named Jonathan Hayes. Have you ever been in a relationship that started perfect but slowly became your worst nightmare? Have you ever wondered how smart, successful people end up with abusers? Brenda's story will show you exactly how it happens and why it could happen to anyone. Jonathan was everything Brenda thought she wanted. He was tall, handsome, studying to become a therapist just like she was. He brought her flowers, wrote her poetry, told her she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Their friends called them the perfect couple. Brenda's mother adored him. Even Brenda's best friend Teresa Rodriguez said she was jealous of their relationship. But behind closed doors, Jonathan was someone else entirely. He monitored Brenda's phone calls. He showed up at her classes unannounced to check on her. He convinced her to stop seeing friends who he said were bad influences. When she got accepted to a prestigious doctoral program in another state, he threw such a violent tantrum that she turned down the opportunity to stay with him. The first time he hit her, it was because she came home 20 minutes late from the library. She had been studying for her comprehensive exams, stressed beyond belief, and stopped to grab coffee with a classmate. When she walked through the door, Jonathan was waiting with a rage she'd never seen before. "Where the hell were you?" he screamed. "I called you 6 times. Brenda tried to explain, but Jonathan grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises. "Don't you ever ignore me again," he hissed. "I was worried sick. I thought something happened to you." Even as her arm throbbed, Brenda found herself apologizing. He was worried about her. He loved her. It was her fault for not answering her phone. This is how it starts, with love that feels like a cage and explanations that sound like excuses. What would you have done in Brenda's position? Would you have left after the first incident, or would you have made excuses too? This is the question that haunts everyone who knew her. The abuse escalated over the next 2 years. Jonathan controlled every aspect of Brenda's life, what she wore, who she talked to, where she went. He convinced her that her family didn't understand their love, that her friends were jealous, that he was the only person who truly cared about her. But Brenda was studying psychology. She was learning about abuse patterns, about power and control, about the cycle of violence. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She was literally studying everything that was happening to her, and yet she couldn't break free. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night in October. Brenda had been accepted to present her research at a national conference, something that could make her career. She was excited, proud, finally feeling like herself again. When she told Jonathan, his face went dark. "You're not going," he said simply. "What do you mean I'm not going? This is huge for me, Jonathan. This could change everything." "I said you're not going." His voice was deadly calm. "I won't let you embarrass me by parading around like some feminist bitch who thinks she's better than everyone else." Brenda felt something snap inside her. "You won't let me? You don't get to decide what I do with my life." That's when Jonathan lost it completely. He grabbed Brenda by the throat and slammed her against the wall. "I own you," he whispered. "Without me, you're nothing. You try to leave me, and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your pathetic life." But this time, something was different. Instead of cowering, instead of apologizing, Brenda looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Get your hands off me." Maybe it was her psychology training kicking in. Maybe it was pure survival instinct. But Brenda finally saw Jonathan for what he really was. Not a man who loved her too much, but a predator who had been slowly destroying her soul. This is the moment that would ultimately save Brenda's life and also seal her fate. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly saw someone's true nature, where everything clicked into place, and you realized you'd been living a lie? That night, while Jonathan slept, Brenda packed a bag and left. She drove straight to her best friend Teresa's house, crying so hard she could barely see the road. Teresa took one look at Brenda's bruised neck and swollen face and immediately called the police. Brenda filed a restraining order the next day. She moved in with Teresa temporarily, then found her own apartment across town. She changed her phone number, blocked Jonathan on all social media, and threw herself into her studies with a fierce determination to rebuild her life. And she did rebuild it. Brenda graduated with honors, got accepted to a prestigious doctoral program, and specialized in trauma therapy. She met Michael Thompson, a kind, gentle man who was nothing like Jonathan. They got married 3 years later in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, who had watched Brenda transform from a broken woman into a confident, successful therapist. Brenda thought she was safe. She thought Jonathan was part of her past. She had no idea that for 7 years he had been watching her, following her career, nurturing his rage like a cancer that grew more malignant with each of her successes. What do you think? Should Brenda have been more careful? Should she have done more to protect herself? Or was this inevitable once she became involved with a man like Jonathan? The answer might surprise you. The last normal day of Brenda's life was a Thursday in March. She had just finished a particularly difficult session with a client who reminded her of her younger self, a brilliant woman trapped in an abusive marriage, convinced she deserved the hell she was living in. Brenda walked to her car feeling drained but hopeful. She had given the woman her card, resources for safe houses, a plan for leaving safely, another life she might be able to save. She called her husband Michael on the drive home like she did every day. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, and Brenda smiled despite her exhaustion. "Hard, but good. I think I might have helped someone today." "That's my girl. I'm making dinner, your favorite. Should be ready by the time you get home." "I love you," Brenda said, and she meant it. After everything she'd been through, she had found genuine love, the kind that healed instead of hurt. "I love you too. Drive safe." Those were the last words her husband would ever say to her. Subscribe now if you're not already, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice in America. And drop a comment. Do you think Brenda felt truly safe? Or do you think part of her always knew this day would come? Brenda never made it home that night. When she didn't show up for dinner, Michael called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called her office. No answer. He called Teresa, Brenda's best friend, who immediately came over to help look for her. They found Brenda's car in the parking lot of her office building at 11:47 p.m. The driver's side door was open, her purse was on the ground, and there was blood on the concrete. Michael called 911, his voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times. "My wife is missing. Her car is here, but she's not. There's blood. Please, you have to help me." The first officers on the scene were Patterson and Williams from the Portland Police Bureau. They secured the scene, called for forensics, and started taking statements. Everything they did in those first crucial hours would later be scrutinized, criticized, and ultimately blamed for letting a killer walk free. The thing that will make you furious, though, is that they had their suspect in 6 hours. When they ran Brenda's background, Jonathan Hayes' name appeared right away. History of domestic violence, restraining order, the entire thing. He would have been taken in for interrogation that very evening by any capable investigator. Instead, Detective Robert Martinez, the lead investigator assigned to the case, decided to let the evidence guide the investigation. He wanted to be thorough, he said. He didn't want to rush to judgment. What do you think about that decision? Was Detective Martinez being professional, or was he making a fatal mistake that would cost Brenda her life? Let me know in the comments, because this decision would haunt everyone involved. While Detective Martinez was being thorough, Jonathan Hayes was covering his tracks. He had a 12-hour head start to dispose of evidence, establish alibis, and prepare his story. 12 hours that could have saved Brenda's life if she was still alive, or at least prevented a killer from walking free if she wasn't. The forensics team found Jonathan's fingerprints on Brenda's car door handle. They found his DNA under her fingernails, where she had clearly fought back. They found a witness who saw a man matching Jonathan's description, arguing with a woman in the parking lot around the time Brenda disappeared. But Detective Martinez wanted more evidence. He wanted the body. He wanted a confession. He wanted an airtight case that would guarantee a conviction. Here's what makes this case so infuriating. They had enough evidence to arrest Jonathan Hayes within 48 hours, but they waited. They waited while he cleaned up his crime scene, while he coached his alibi witnesses, while he prepared his defense. How many killers get this kind of head start? 3 days after Brenda disappeared, they finally brought Jonathan in for questioning. He came with a lawyer, which was his right, but it also meant he wasn't talking. His story was simple. He hadn't seen Brenda in years, had no idea she was missing, and had been home alone that night watching television. The lawyer, a slick defense attorney named Patricia Collins, immediately went on the offensive. "My client has been harassed by this woman for years," she claimed. "She's obsessed with him, has been stalking him, trying to ruin his life. This is clearly a setup." It was a lie, but it was a lie that would stick. Jonathan had spent years building a false narrative, telling anyone who would listen that his ex-girlfriend was crazy and obsessed with him. He had saved every email Brenda had sent him, every text message, every voicemail, not as threats but as evidence of her supposed obsession. Have you ever noticed how abusers always flip the script, how they make themselves the victim? This is exactly what Jonathan did, and it worked perfectly. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Detective Martinez followed every lead, interviewed every witness, processed every piece of evidence. He was thorough, methodical, professional. He was also completely outmaneuvered by a psychopath who had been planning this for years. Jonathan's alibi was bulletproof, or so it seemed. He had been home that night, he said, watching a movie with his roommate, Francis Rogers. Francis confirmed the story, said they had ordered pizza, watched The Shawshank Redemption, and gone to bed around midnight. But here's what Detective Martinez missed. Francis Rogers was lying. He had been paid $10,000 to provide Jonathan with an alibi, money that came from Jonathan's inheritance when his grandmother died 6 months earlier. The pizza order was placed online to create a digital timestamp. The movie was chosen because it was long enough to cover the time of Brenda's disappearance. This is the kind of planning that keeps me up at night. How long do you think Jonathan had been planning this? How many other details did he think through? What else did investigators miss? 2 weeks into the investigation, they found Brenda's body. She was discovered by a hiker in Forest Park, a vast wilderness area just outside Portland. She had been strangled, and the medical examiner determined she had been dead for approximately 2 weeks, right around the time she disappeared. The location was significant. Forest Park was one of Jonathan's favorite places to hike. He had taken Brenda there dozens of times when they were dating, had proposed to her on one of the trails. It was his way of marking his territory, of claiming her even in death. But Detective Martinez couldn't prove Jonathan had been there. The body was too decomposed, the crime scene too contaminated by weather and wildlife. The physical evidence that might have tied Jonathan to the location was gone. What do you think? Was choosing Forest Park Jonathan's biggest mistake, or his most brilliant move? Was he being sentimental, or was he sending a message? The forensics team did find something crucial, though. Brenda's fingernails contained skin cells and blood that didn't match her DNA. When they ran it through the database, they got a hit: Jonathan Hayes. This should have been the smoking gun, the evidence that would put Jonathan away for life. Brenda had fought back, had left her mark on her killer. She had given investigators exactly what they needed to get justice. But Jonathan's lawyer had an explanation for that too. "My client and the victim had a sexual relationship years ago," Patricia Collins argued. "DNA can persist under fingernails for extended periods, especially if there's no thorough cleaning. This proves nothing except that they were intimate at some point in the past." It was another lie, but it was a lie that created reasonable doubt. The medical examiner couldn't say definitively when the DNA had been deposited. Jonathan's lawyer painted a picture of a desperate woman who had been carrying a torch for her ex-lover, who might have planted the evidence herself. This is where our justice system fails victims every single day. How is it possible that a killer can explain away his own DNA found under his victim's fingernails? What would it take to convince you if you were on that jury? The case against Jonathan Hayes was falling apart, and Detective Martinez knew it. He had fingerprints, DNA, a witness, and a clear motive. But he also had a defendant with a solid alibi, a skilled lawyer, and a narrative that painted the victim as the aggressor. 6 months after Brenda's body was found, the district attorney made a decision that would haunt everyone involved. There wasn't enough evidence to guarantee a conviction, he said. The case was too circumstantial, too dependent on evidence that could be explained away. Jonathan Hayes was never charged with Brenda Mitchell's murder. How does this happen? How does a man literally caught red-handed escape justice? And more importantly, how do we make sure this never happens again? The news devastated Brenda's family. Her husband Michael couldn't understand how the system had failed so completely. "They had his fingerprints," he said at a press conference, his voice shaking with rage. "They had his DNA under her fingernails. They had witnesses. How is this not enough?" Brenda's mother, Patricia Mitchell, was even more direct. "My daughter spent her life helping women escape from men like Jonathan Hayes. She saved dozens of lives, and when she needed the system to save her, it failed. It failed her completely." If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We're not just telling stories here, we're fighting for justice, one case at a time. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if this was your daughter, your sister, your wife? How far would you go to get justice? The case went cold, but Jonathan Hayes didn't disappear. He moved to Seattle, changed his name to John Harrison, and started a new life. He got a job at a tech company, joined a hiking club, started dating again. He was living the life that Brenda would never have, free as if he had never strangled the woman who had loved him. But Brenda's family never stopped fighting. Michael hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Carol Anderson, who specialized in cold cases. Teresa organized annual memorial runs to keep Brenda's name in the public eye. Patricia Mitchell started a foundation that provided legal aid to domestic violence survivors. They kept pressure on the police, the district attorney, the media. They demanded answers, demanded justice, demanded that someone be held accountable for the system that had failed Brenda so completely. What do you think kept them going? What would give you the strength to fight for justice year after year with no guarantee of success? These are the questions that define who we are as human beings. 3 years after Brenda's murder, there was finally a break in the case. Francis Rogers, Jonathan's roommate who had provided the alibi, was arrested on unrelated drug charges. Facing serious prison time, he decided to make a deal. He told investigators the truth about that night. Jonathan had paid him $10,000 to lie about being home together. Jonathan had left the apartment around 6 p.m. and hadn't returned until after 2 a.m. He had been agitated, had taken a shower immediately, and had thrown away a bag of clothes. Francis even remembered details that only someone telling the truth would know. Jonathan had cuts on his hands when he came home, scratches on his arms like he had been in a fight. He had been muttering to himself something about stupid bitch and should have left me alone. This is it, the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Finally, someone was willing to tell the truth. But here's the question that will make you sick. Was it too little, too late? Detective Martinez, who had been haunted by the case for 3 years, immediately reopened the investigation. He got a warrant for Jonathan's arrest, tracked him down in Seattle, and brought him back to Portland to face charges. But Jonathan's lawyer, Patricia Collins, was ready. 3 years had passed, she argued. The witness was a drug addict making a deal to save his own skin. The evidence was still the same circumstantial case that hadn't been strong enough to prosecute 3 years earlier. What do you think? Should Francis Rogers be believed? Is a confession from a drug addict enough to convict a killer? Or is this just another example of the justice system failing victims? The trial of Jonathan Hayes began 4 years after Brenda Mitchell's murder. The prosecution presented their case, the fingerprints, the DNA, the witness testimony, and now Francis Rogers' confession about the alibi. They painted a picture of an obsessed ex-boyfriend who couldn't accept rejection, who had stalked Brenda for years before finally killing her. The defense presented their own narrative. Brenda Mitchell was an unstable woman who had been obsessed with Jonathan for years. She had planted evidence, manipulated witnesses, and ultimately was responsible for her own death. Jonathan was the victim of an elaborate frame-up by a woman who couldn't let go. Which story do you believe? The prosecution's case about an abusive ex-boyfriend, or the defense's claim about an obsessed victim? This is the choice the jury had to make. The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 days while Brenda's family waited for justice, while Jonathan sat in jail for the first time since the murder, while the entire city watched to see if their justice system would finally work. On the 7th day, they came back with a verdict. Not guilty. How is this possible? How does a jury look at all this evidence and decide there's reasonable doubt? What would it take to convince you? The foreman later explained their decision to a local news reporter. We all thought he probably did it, he said, but probably isn't enough. The evidence was circumstantial. The main witness was a drug addict. We couldn't convict someone on probably. Jonathan Hayes walked out of the courtroom a free man. He had beaten the system, outsmarted the investigators, and gotten away with murder. Brenda Mitchell was still dead. Her family was still grieving, and her killer was free to start over somewhere else. If you're feeling sick to your stomach right now, you're not alone. This is what happens when our justice system fails. But Brenda's story isn't over yet. Today, Jonathan Hayes, now going by the name John Harrison, lives in Denver, Colorado. He works as a software engineer, lives in a nice apartment, drives a new car. He's dating a woman named Lisa Park, a nurse who has no idea about his past. He's living the life that Brenda Mitchell will never have, but Brenda's family never stopped fighting. Michael Mitchell, Brenda's widower, has dedicated his life to changing the laws that failed his wife. He's pushed for legislation that would make it easier to prosecute domestic violence cases, that would close the loopholes that let killers walk free. Teresa Rodriguez, Brenda's best friend, started a non-profit that provides legal aid to domestic violence survivors. She's helped over 500 women escape abusive relationships, women who might have ended up like Brenda if they hadn't gotten help. Patricia Mitchell, Brenda's mother, speaks at conferences across the country about the failures of the justice system. She's lobbied for better training for police officers, for specialized domestic violence courts, for anything that might prevent another family from going through what hers did. These are the real heroes of this story. They took their grief and turned it into action. They refused to let Brenda's death be meaningless. What would you do in their position? The case remains technically open, but Detective Martinez, who has since retired, admits that new evidence is unlikely. We had him, he says. We had the fingerprints, the DNA, the witness. But the system failed. It failed Brenda. It failed her family. And it failed every woman who's in danger right now. There have been developments, though. In 2019, a new witness came forward, a woman named Angela Foster was hiking in Forest Park on the day Brenda's body was found. She saw a man near the location who matched Jonathan's description, but she didn't come forward at the time because she didn't realize it was connected to the case. The Portland Police Bureau interviewed Angela, took her statement, and added it to the case file. But statute of limitations issues and double jeopardy laws mean that Jonathan can never be tried again for Brenda's murder, no matter what new evidence emerges. This is the most infuriating part of this entire case. Jonathan Hayes got away with murder, and now he's legally protected from ever being held accountable. How is this justice? But there's something else you need to know about Jonathan Hayes. Brenda Mitchell wasn't his only victim. In 2018, a woman named Rebecca Martinez filed a restraining order against John Harrison in Denver. She claimed he had been stalking her, threatening her, controlling her life in ways that sounded eerily familiar to anyone who knew Brenda's story. Rebecca's case was dismissed when she failed to appear in court. According to her sister, Rebecca had been too scared to testify. She had moved to another state, changed her name, and was living in hiding. How many other women has Jonathan Hayes terrorized? How many other victims are out there too scared to come forward? This is the real cost of letting killers walk free. In 2020, another woman came forward. Maria Santos had dated John Harrison for 6 months before she realized he was dangerous. He had monitored her phone, isolated her from friends, and threatened to kill her if she ever left him. Maria managed to escape, but she never reported it to police. She was undocumented, she said, and was afraid of being deported. She only came forward after seeing a news story about Brenda Mitchell's case and realizing she had been dating a suspected murderer. This is the pattern with men like Jonathan Hayes. They don't kill once and stop. They escalate, they find new victims, they keep hunting. How many women could have been saved if he had been convicted for Brenda's murder? The current status of the case is heartbreaking. Detective Martinez has been replaced by Detective Susan Walsh, who reviews the file periodically, but admits there's little hope for new developments. The physical evidence has been preserved, but there's no new forensic technology that could provide additional insight. Michael Mitchell has remarried, but he still visits Brenda's grave every year on the anniversary of her death. He still gets calls from reporters asking about the case, still hopes that someday someone will come forward with information that could finally bring justice. What do you think Michael should do? Should he move on, or should he keep fighting for justice? Is there a point where the fight becomes more harmful than healing? Teresa Rodriguez continues to run the non-profit Brenda's Voice, which has helped over 1,000 women escape abusive relationships. She says every woman she helps is a victory for Brenda, a life saved in her memory. Patricia Mitchell, now 67 years old, still speaks at conferences about domestic violence. She's battling cancer, but she says she won't stop fighting until the laws change, until the system that failed Brenda is fixed. These women have turned their grief into purpose. They've saved lives, changed laws, and kept Brenda's memory alive. But should they have to do this? Shouldn't our justice system have worked the first time? The most recent development came in 2022, when a true crime podcast called Justice Delayed featured Brenda's case. The podcast received over 100 tips from listeners, including several from women who claimed to have been abused by Jonathan Hayes. None of the tips led to new charges, but they did confirm what investigators had suspected. Jonathan Hayes is a serial abuser who has been terrorizing women for over a decade. He's a predator who learned from his mistakes, who got better at hiding his crimes, who benefits from a system that demands impossible standards of proof. How many tips would it take to convince you? How many women have to come forward before we admit that Jonathan Hayes is exactly what he appears to be? The Portland Police Bureau has assigned a new detective to review the case annually. Detective Lisa Rogers, no relation to Francis Rogers, says she's hopeful that new forensic techniques or witness testimony could eventually break the case open. But realistically, the chances of Jonathan Hayes ever being held accountable for Brenda Mitchell's murder are slim to none. He's legally protected by double jeopardy laws, he's covered his tracks, and he's had years to perfect his story. This is the reality of our justice system. Sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes killers walk free. Sometimes families never get the closure they deserve. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Brenda Mitchell would have been 39 years old today. She would have helped hundreds more women escape abusive relationships. She would have written more books, given more speeches, saved more lives. Instead, she's been dead for 5 years while her killer lives free. But her legacy lives on in every woman who escapes an abusive relationship, in every law that gets passed to protect victims, in every family that gets the justice Brenda's family was denied. What detail in this case bothered you the most? What do you think investigators should have done differently? Do you believe Jonathan Hayes is guilty, or do you think there's reasonable doubt? Let me know in the comments below. Your perspective matters. The search for justice continues, and hope never dies. Cases like Brenda's show us the worst of humanity, but they also show us the best, the families who never give up, the advocates who turn grief into action, the communities that refuse to let victims be forgotten. If unsolved mysteries like this move you, stories of brilliant women silenced by violent men, families who refuse to give up, and the belief that truth will eventually surface, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit that like button if this story made you feel something and you believe answers are still out there. And listen, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Every single week, we dive deep into cases that law enforcement gave up on, stories that mainstream media won't touch, and mysteries that deserve answers. Your subscription literally helps us investigate more cases, reach more families, and maybe, just maybe, help solve these crimes. We're not just telling stories here, we're fighting for justice, one case at a time. Subscribe right now and join our growing army of truth seekers who refuse to let these cases die in forgotten file cabinets. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Some of these revelations will absolutely blow your mind. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might hold a piece of the puzzle. What detail in this case bothered you the most? What do you think investigators should have done differently? Do you have theories about what really happened? Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective might be exactly what's needed to crack this case. What unsolved mystery should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, the search for answers continues, and every case deserves to be solved. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or visit thehotline.org. Help is available 24/7, and your call could save a life.